movie opens with a dark and disturbing scene, the celebration of Robin's 11th birthday. But this party has no children's laughter, no balloons, no joy. Instead, the camera takes a chilling tour that reveals a true massacre inside the house. The guests lie scattered across the floor, severely wounded and bleeding because of the boy himself. Suddenly, a terrified woman desperately trying to save her life hides under a table. From her fragile hiding spot, she watches in absolute horror as little Robin, gripping a wooden bat in his hands, approaches with slow and calculated steps toward a man lying on the floor, finishing him off in a brutal and merciless way. The subsequent silence is sepulchral, broken only by the sound of the woman's held breath. However, in a movement driven by panic, she accidentally causes a glass to fall from the table, shattering against the floor. The sharp sound immediately draws the attention of the macabre birthday boy, who was already walking away. Upon seeing herself discovered, the woman breaks into tears and begs for mercy with her heart in her hand, hoping to appeal to a trace of innocence in the child. But Robin's gaze is completely empty, and he eliminates her without the slightest hesitation. Right at that moment of maximum tension, someone appears from the shadows and opens fire on the boy. Robin falls wounded to the floor, and in that same second, the most heartbreaking truth is revealed. The woman who had been hiding and whom he had just murdered was his own mother. 34 years later, the weight of the past reappears in an overwhelming way when Aidan, Robin's father, devoured by decades of pain, loneliness, and a guilt that eats away at his soul, decides to channel his suffering in a dangerous way. In the cold intimacy of his workshop, he manipulates cables, gears, and metal to build a robotic doll with a childlike appearance that he decides to baptize with the name of his deceased son. One night, the unsettling calm that reigns in the huge mansion is shattered by a heartbreaking scream. Freya, Aidan's caregiver, finds the house cat lifeless in the garden. When he answers the call and examines the grim scene, Aidan notices a detail that freezes his blood. The hand of his new and tender mechanical creation is completely stained with thick red paint. The metal creature has gained an unsettling autonomy. While this is happening, far from that oppressive atmosphere, the light seems to shine for Leo and his beautiful girlfriend Lexi, who are walking along the seashore. In a deeply moving moment, Leo surprises her by pulling out the same book she was reading the day they met 5 years ago. Hidden between the pages is an engagement ring. With the sound of the waves in the background, Leo kneels down, and she, overflowing with emotion, hugs him and accepts the proposal. However, happiness vanishes in the blink of an eye when Leo's phone vibrates. A chilling text message breaks the magic. "You're right. She is beautiful." Leo looks up, paralyzed, and spots a mysterious man watching him from a distance. A second and sadistic threat immediately arrives. "Would hate to have to cut such a pretty face? You have 24 hours to pay." Cornered by a huge debt of $50,000 that puts their lives at risk, Leo decides to lie to his fiancée and makes a desperate decision: to travel immediately to the mansion of his millionaire uncle Aidan, whom he hasn't seen since he was placed in a home after his parents' death, with the firm intention of getting the money by any means necessary. Upon arriving at the imposing and gloomy mansion, the couple is received by Aidan, who confesses a disturbing detail that changes everything. He suffered a terrible car accident that completely erased all his memories of the past, to the point of not being able to recognize his own nephew. Despite the resentment Leo held, seeing his uncle so vulnerable and dependent on Freya's care softens the situation. However, tranquility is an illusion. From the top of the stairs, a cold and motionless plastic gaze watches them from the shadows. It is Robin, the android with intense blue eyes. During dinner, the atmosphere becomes heavy and full of mystery. Aidan formally introduces the robot as his shy companion and even demonstrates, through an unsettling trick behind closed doors, how the doll is capable of disappearing from its chair in a matter of seconds without leaving a trace. It is later that night when Freya, visibly scared and trembling, approaches Leo in private to warn him that things happen in that house that defy the supernatural. She confesses that the more time she spends with the doll, the more convinced she is that it is not just nuts and bolts, but that it harbors a cruel and extremely dangerous entity. Freya's worst fears materialize that same night. While waiting for a taxi outside the mansion, she notices the lights in the stable flickering intermittently. Driven by duty, she ventures into the darkness of the place. Sensing a strange presence, she grabs a hammer to protect herself and checks every corner with her heart beating at 1,000 per hour. Suddenly, death manifests in the blink of an eye. Robin appears out of nowhere behind her, and with terrifying coldness, cuts her throat with a knife, ending her brutally in the middle of the gloom. At dawn, Aiden discovers bloodstains on the robot's cheeks. Alarmed, and with growing desperation, he takes the doll to his room, opens its chest, and completely removes the battery to turn it off. It is at that precise moment that the psychological horror is unleashed. Despite having no power source, Robin's eyes suddenly open, revealing that the android is possessed by a force that goes beyond science. Meanwhile, guided by the urgency to pay his debt, Leo takes advantage of the night to search the house and comes across an old trunk in the robot's room. When he opens it, he discovers with astonishment the belongings of the original Robin who died 34 years ago. After a strong startle upon coming face to face with the doll in the darkness, Leo confronts his uncle. It is here that the most moving scene of the movie unfolds. A devastated Aiden, with tears rolling down his cheeks, confesses the immense pain of being sick and not being able to remember the details of his own son's death, firmly admitting that the little boy's soul somehow returned and inhabits his mechanical creation. The plot plunges into a spiral of unstoppable violence. Outside, the police investigate Freya's disappearance after finding her blood-stained phone. Detective Farmer enters the barn following strange noises and comes across Robin, whose eyes now glow with an electric blue. Before she can react, the robot brutally pierces her with a piece of metal and activates an electric discharge that ends her life. Minutes later, her partner, Detective Livingston, meets the same fate when he is ambushed and eliminated by the relentless android with a lit blowtorch. While death claims the outside of the house, inside, Leo convinces a terrified Lexi to go down to the dark, damp, and cavernous basement of the mansion, convinced that a safe with $500,000 is there. Upon reaching the labyrinth of underground caves, they decide to separate, a decision that proves fatal. Lexi comes face to face with Robin, who throws a savage knife slash at her. She runs for her life in a suffocating sequence, managing to get into a ventilation duct. However, the robot's cold fury knows no limits. It inserts a machete through the walls of the duct. Lexi's brutal, desperate screams echo throughout the basement until the weapon pierces her. Leo manages to open the duct to rescue her, but it is too late. Lexi agonizes and dies in his arms in a heartbreaking scene, leaving him completely devastated. After a violent struggle where Leo manages to rip the plastic skin off the robot's face, it knocks him out with a shard of glass. Leo wakes up tied to a chair in the gloom of the basement, the same place where, according to Robin's sinister words, the child was tortured in the past. The robot begins to shoot nails into his shoulder with tremendous cruelty, demanding that he confess who he really is. Breaking into tears, submerged in physical pain and the weight of having lost his beloved, Leo confesses the most shocking truth of the story. He was never Aiden's legitimate nephew. In reality, he was the former gardener of the mansion, who, after learning of the accident and Aiden's amnesia, planned to impersonate his relative to steal the safe and settle his debts. Crying inconsolably and begging for mercy he will not receive, Leo takes advantage of a distraction to cut the ropes with one of the nails. In a last desperate survival effort, he lunges at the robot, snatches the nail gun from it, and with agitated breathing, shouts that he will defeat it in Lexi's name. But just before he can take revenge, Aiden's heavy footsteps descend the basement stairs. The old man, protecting the only thing he has left of his son, raises a gun and shoots Leo 3 times in succession, ending his life on the spot and letting silence reign once again in the darkness.